So everyone seems to be super quick to start building in Lovable, and I think Lovable is a fantastic tool to get something out there fast, but Cursor is also a viable option, especially if you want to build something where you're more in the driver's seat. So today we are going to be building a product in Cursor from scratch. Not just any product though. We are going to be building a trivia game based on the show Friends. Now, I have a confession to make. When I was in high school, I was obsessed with the show Friends, like embarrassingly obsessed. I actually used to type out different quotes from the show that I loved and put it up in my AIM away message. Now, if you don't know what AIM is, I am sorry. That is one thing I will not be teaching you today. But what we will be covering is how to build in Cursor, but in a more incremental fashion. Most people try to build everything in one massive prompt and end up with spaghetti code that they can't debug. I'm going to show you a different approach. We're going to be using incremental prompts that build layer by layer. You'll see the exact 4 prompts I use, why each one is structured the way it is, and how to test and iterate as you go. Also, we're going to walk through the actual code that gets generated at each step. I'll show you what Cursor built and explain what it's doing in plain English. Let's get started. All right, so here is the game plan. So we are going to be building almost like a Friends trivia who said it type functionality. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our project along with the data. So these are the actual quotes that we'll be using. Second, we'll build this entire flashcard component with that flip animation. We want a flipping animation. This is where the magic will happen. Third, we'll add this next quote button so you can actually quiz yourself. And fourth, we'll polish up the design so it makes it look better, more refined, more polished, like a real product. And finally, we will push it live to the internet using a service called Vercel. Sound good? Let's get started. Now, if you don't know me, I'm Sunny. I'm a serial founder now on my 4th startup, LightSwitch. I'm also a former senior engineer at Bloomberg and Shopify, and currently an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School, where I teach. Listen, I have been building software for over 15 years, well before AI, and I have made all the mistakes so you don't have to. And my goal for this video and all my videos is to help you get your ideas out into the world. Let's get started with our first step. All right, so let's get started. Before you start, you will need to download Cursor. I'll share the link below. You'll need to go and sign up for an account and download the actual application. This is not a web-based application. It is an application that will live on your computer. This is basically what it looks like. This is an empty project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and we'll call it Friends Trivia App. So I've created a new folder on my file system, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open it in Cursor. So this is a completely blank folder. This has nothing in it, and we are going to now build off of this. And just to kind of give you a sense of what is happening on the screen and just like a tour of Cursor. So on this left side, we have kind of like the folder menu, which has all the files and folders. It doesn't have anything in it because it is an empty folder. In this center kind of console area, this is where we are actually going to write the code. And on the right here is where we interface with whatever AI agents are available. In my case, because I have a paid account, I'm using Sonnet 4.5, but you could use whatever model makes sense for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first prompt, and I'm going to paste it here. Now let's read this together. Create a React app with Vite Tailwind CSS and shadcn UI. Initialize shadcn UI and install the card and components. Create a quotes.csv file in the public folder with columns, quote, and character, and add 10 famous Friends quotes as sample data. So we are starting with just a very basic scaffolding of a blank React app. We haven't given the AI too much information yet on what we're going to build. What we just want is a blank React app with nothing in it. And then we're also going to have a data file. This is going to be the actual quotes, the friends quotes that we're going to have. We're going to start with 10. So let's hit enter and see what comes up on the other side. Now, before we look at what Cursor generates, I want to explain what I just asked for because you might be seeing some terms for the first time. So let's actually review some of the terms. So first, there's React. So this is the framework that we're using to actually build the front end of our application. I'm sure it's a term that you've heard a lot. And very simply put, it just helps us scaffold a nice new app for us. Vite is a tool that basically runs the development server for us. Think of it like the engine that makes everything work while we're building. Tailwind CSS, this is a library that will handle visual styling for us, things like colors, spacing, rounded corners. shadcn/UI, this gives us pre-made components like buttons and cards that were designed by professionals. So instead of building everything from scratch, we are going to use pre-prepared UI components that already look good. So we don't necessarily need to be amazing designers to go ahead and do it. Cool. Let's jump back to Cursor. So it looks like Cursor is trying to run commands for us, which is fine. So what it's doing is it's going into this directory and it's actually creating a blank React app on Vite. So we're going to hit run here. And let's see what happens here. Okay, so it looks like it created the scaffolding for our application. So we have like a basic public folder, and then we have all the basic applications. And now what it's doing is it's just setting up the project, installing all our dependencies. If you don't know what dependencies are, no worries. It's just basically setting up the very foundation of what we are going to be building. So again, now it's installing Tailwind CSS. It's seeing some errors, so it's trying to figure out how to kind of work around those errors. All right, so it looks like it's done. Let's see kind of like what it has created. It's created a lot of scaffolding. So here we actually have our core apps. We have some super basic buttons. We have the actual app itself. Most importantly, we have our quotes. These are the sample quotes. You can see it's a very simple file with the quote, comma, and the character. So we were on a break, the famous quote from Ross. Pivot, another very famous quote from Ross. So this all looks good, but what I want to do is I want to actually launch a local server. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up the terminal in Cursor. Now, what the terminal is just a direct line of communication to your computer. So you can run commands in this file and it'll be able to do things like launching a local server. So typically when you access any kind of application, you're accessing it on a server that's on the internet. In this case, while we're building, we're going to launch a server that's sitting on your computer. So that way, when you're building and changing stuff, you can see the changes in real time. Now, the first thing that we have to do is we actually have to install our dependencies. And the command for that is npm install. And what this does very simply is it will download the tools that we need to run this app. Remember, the things that we asked for in the prompt, things like React, things like Tailwind, shadcn, this command, this npm install command, essentially goes out into the internet, grabs them all, and put them all in this folder called node modules. It looks like we have everything. There's some warnings here that we can ignore, but it looks like we have everything we need. So that's the first step of launching a server. All right, so the next step is to actually launch a server. So we're going to run npm run dev. Now, what this will do is it will spin up a local server on your computer. So we see that it's running on localhost 5173. So let's actually see this in action. This is what our current application looks like. So it's not much, but again, this is just the very, very basic scaffolding for what we want. If you notice, this is on localhost 5173. This is not a link you could share with someone else where they would be able to access it, because this is a server that is running on your computer. So we're actually in good shape to move on to the next step. But before I do, I want to make this one very important point. The tools you choose for styling matter a lot when you're building with AI. Here's what I mean. When you ask AI to build something with no design system, it will produce generic looking apps. You've probably seen them before. Everything kind of looks the same, bland, very clearly generated by AI. But when you give AI good building blocks to work with, like shadcn UI components, suddenly your UI feels a little cleaner, maybe a little bit more professional, because the fact is AI builds with what you give it. Give it nothing and it will invent generic solutions. Give it professional components and it will build professional looking products. That's what we're doing with shadcn UI. It will give Cursor pre-built components, things like cards, buttons, layouts that already look professional. So when Cursor is going to build our flashcard, it's starting from something that doesn't look like generic AI slop. Because when you're building with AI, choosing the right design system is super, super important. All right, let's move on to our next step. I'm going to put in my second prompt here. Let's read it together. Create a flashcard component that reads quotes.csv. This is that CSV file that we generated here with the friends quotes. And display a random quote inside a shadcn card. So what I'm saying is, let's pull this component that shadcn is providing for us, this card component. And then we're also saying the card should flip when clicked to reveal the character name on the back. Use smooth 3D CSS flip animations. Just a technical term to basically use 3D, a nicer animation treatment. So while that's running, let's again break down what Cursor is doing under the hood. So first, it's creating the flashcard component. Second, it's setting up the flip state logic. Third, it's writing the CSS using 3D flip animation. And then finally, it's wrapping everything in a shadcn card. Let's see what this comes back with on the other side. All right, so it's done. Let's see what Cursor has done. So just to again show you the workflow a little bit, so we see that it's done. You can read the summary, but also what's really cool is you could see specifically like what's changing in the actual code. So we see here that this entire flashcard component has been created, which is great. That's what we would expect. And then also there's an additional change that we're adding here. Originally this had that like static data before, and now we're moving it to this component. So again, if you are somewhat literate when it comes to code, this might be helpful. If not, you don't actually have to read it. Just reading what the response is here can be helpful enough. But I want to actually see what is actually happening to our product from a UI perspective. So I'm going to flip back to the product. So this looks different, right? This looks very different. You have a card. It is a nice like card-like element with this shadow that we see here. And then we can flip back and forth to see the character. They don't know they don't know that we know they know we know. I remember this specific scene. And that is, of course, Phoebe. And you can get another quote. Obviously, this is Joey. But I'm having a little too much fun. But yeah, so this is kind of like the incremental update that we had. But I want to make this other point. Like, obviously, the workflow in Cursor is very different than something like Lovable if you're used to that. And I want to just highlight some of the differences. So Lovable is a hosted platform that sits on the internet, right? You prompt it, it builds the full app for you, and it handles hosting. It's incredibly fast. You get a working app in minutes, and it's great for perfect for rapid prototyping and especially no code builders. Cursor, on the other hand, is a local tool, meaning you're building the app on your computer. You own the entire code base. You can actually edit any file you want manually. You choose where you want to deploy it. So it's for people who want more full control. So which do you use when? That's a common question I typically get. So you want to use Lovable when you want to want maximum speed and you're okay with a little less control over the code, over the infrastructure. You want to use Cursor when you want to own everything. So the code, the deployment, the strategy, the ability to customize everything deeply. So those are some of the differences. All right, so we are actually in good shape. Let's move on to our next step. So our next step is adding this next quote functionality, which we actually already have in the application, but I just want to polish this up and actually use a proper button for this. So let's put in our next prompt. So the next prompt is going to be this. Add a shadcn button below the card labeled next quote that loads a random next quote and resets the card. So we'll hit enter. And again, while that's running, let's go over what Cursor is doing. So it's adding that button component that we're pulling from shadcn. It's attaching that loading of a new random function to that button, and then also resetting the flipped card once that's clicked. All right, let's see what we get on the other side. All right, so this is what our button looks like. It looks like a proper button now. So super simple, clean, and functional. All right, so we're good to move on to the next step, but first, here's something I've learned after building with AI for some time now. Incremental prompts instead of one-shot prompts can make the process so much more pleasant. A lot of people try to get everything done in one massive prompt, and sometimes that works, but more often you get a tangled mess that's like very hard to debug. Breaking it into stages like setup, core feature, interaction, polish, gives you checkpoints. If something breaks, you know exactly where. And also you learn along the way and you can shape the next stage during those learnings. And you can basically test each piece before moving to the next. That's the most important. It's not about prompting perfectly. It's about prompting strategically. All right, let's move on to the next step. All right, so this thing works, but it doesn't feel very special. It feels very sterile. I mean, I like a minimal aesthetic, but this is probably too minimal for a friend's trivia app. So here is the next prompt I'm going to give. Style the app with a playful friends theme. I've attached the logo. Let me actually do that right now. So it should fit the general style. Add subtle hover animations to the card, make the overall design feel polished and cohesive. Here are some of the accent colors. Before I hit send, let's actually take a look at the logo. So this is our friends logo, and what I've done is I've basically gotten the color codes for these little dots. I'm also attaching this in the prompt. So that's what these color codes are. So hopefully it feels a little bit more native to friends. Now, while that's running, let's review what Cursor is doing. Cursor is adding those colors. Hopefully it'll be updating the fonts for something more playful. It's also adding those hover effects and also micro animations. And ultimately, we're hoping that it can make the card feel more premium. So let's see what it comes back with on the other side. Right, so it's done. Let's take a look at our styling. Okay. Nice. Okay, so this has like way more pizzazz. It's a little bit more fun. Definitely something more fun and interesting to share with other people. So we have polished up our app, and now we could go to our final step, which is deploying it to the internet. Now, before we jump to our final step, I want to make this one last point. What separates the demo products from the real shareable products is the polish. Anyone can build a functional version of what we just built. The flashcard flips, the button works, that's great. But does it feel great? Does it make someone smile? Does it look like something someone would actually use. That last 20%, the animations, the colors, the imagery, the little details, that's what makes people share your product. That's what makes them remember it. So this was fun and fine to do in, a span of 20 minutes, but obviously there's so much more that we can add to this. We could link to actual videos, link to GIFs, link to actual images, make it even more fun. So there's way more that we could do with this. I'm not going to do it on this video, but you kind of get the idea of how far we can go to make something really delightful for our users. Okay, let's move on to our last step. So we know that we want to move it. We know that we want to push this to the internet. Before we can do that, we need to decide on a hosting service. I'm going to go with Vercel because Vercel is super fast. It's very beginner friendly. So you'll have to sign up for an account there, and then you'll also have to install Vercel CLI. This basically allows us to deploy using commands in the terminal. Once you have that set up, you'll be good to go. Here's what I'm going to do to deploy to the internet. All I'm going to do is type in this command, Vercel deploy -- prod, which means we want to deploy to the internet. It's going to ask us a couple of questions. I'm just going to hit yes to all of it, go with the defaults. So now it is being deployed to the internet. Let's see what happens on the other side. So while Vercel is pushing our product to the internet, I do want to just double click on what exactly the terminal is. So the terminal is basically a way to talk to your computer using text commands instead of finding an app and actually clicking buttons on a user interface. Why do we use it? Well, because a lot of developer tools like Vercel, they don't have a pretty interface with buttons. Instead, the way that you work with these tools is you just type a command and run it. And it may feel old school, but it's actually way more efficient once you actually get used to it. So a good metaphor to use here is this. So clicking around on an actual interface is almost like ordering food by pointing at pictures on a menu, whereas the terminal is just like telling your waiter exactly what you want. It's the same result, but a lot less friction. And don't worry if it feels weird at first. All you're doing is you're just typing commands and hitting enter. That's it. Okay, let's see what Vercel has pushed to the internet. All right, so it looks like Vercel is done, and this is where our application is going to live. So I'm just copying this little link here. I'm going to go back to our browser, and let's see. All right, cool. This is fully live. This is now on the internet. You see it's not a local host, and it's shareable. You can now send it to friends. We just went from nothing to a fully working app that has been pushed to production in a span of 20 minutes. Very exciting stuff. All right, that is a wrap. Before we conclude, I just want to review what we've done. So we have built a fully functional flashcard app in just a couple of prompts, set up data, core functionality with the flip animation, the next quote button, and of course that design polish. Then we did our last step, which is deploying it to the internet using Vercel. Now, here is what I want you to take away from this video. The barrier to building is now gone. The tools exist, they're powerful, they're accessible. Cursor can write code with you. Vercel can deploy in seconds. The only thing stopping you from shipping is whether you actually start. And here's the thing. You don't need a perfect idea. This product that we just built is silly, but it also taught us the full workflow. Prompting, building, testing, deploying, all of it. Once you've shipped that first thing, the next thing becomes easier, and then the next one becomes easier, and the momentum builds. Now here is your homework. Customize this. Change the theme. Maybe make it quotes from The Office, movie trivia, startup advice, whatever you're into. Add some more features. Make it yours, and then deploy it and tag me because I would love to see what you build. Because here's the bigger lesson. I want you to stop waiting for the perfect idea. Build the fun thing first. Learn the tools. Get the reps in. Momentum beats perfection every single time. The best builders aren't the ones with the best ideas. They are the ones who actually ship. Now, if you stuck around till the end of this video, I appreciate you. I will see you on the next one.